Hello everyone, my name is Stephen Lawton. I'm the Special Projects Editor at SC Media. Welcome to today's Analysis Brief webcast entitled Still Intruding After All These Years. This webcast is co-sponsored by SC Media and our corporate partner, BluVector. Analysis Brief webcasts are a production of the SC Media editorial department. These webcasts address the results of a market research survey conducted jointly by SC Media and our corporate sponsor. You can think of this webcast as an informal discussion of the survey results with a subject matter expert. This is not a product pitch. With that said, let's move on. Please welcome to our studios today, Travis Rossick, Chief Technology and Strategy Officer at BluVector. With nearly 20 years of experience in the security industry, Travis is a widely known cyber defense leader, having led several commercial and U.S. government programs. Prior to his role at BluVector, Travis held several leadership positions, including CTO at Tycon and federal CTO at FireEye, as well as senior roles at McAfee and the Department of Defense. Unlike our 2020 webcasts, today's Analysis Brief webcast will start off with brief comments by both Travis and myself. There will be a Q&A following the presentation, so we encourage you to type any questions that you might have for either of us in the interface. Okay, now let's set the stage. Intrusion detection is hardly a bleeding-edge technology, but there's a reason we still use it. Detecting an intrusion is a first step to stopping a serious data breach. In an industry that touts bleeding-edge technologies and tends to relegate older technologies to the virtual trash heap after just a few years, it's telling that intrusion detection is still considered an essential technology. A recent survey of security professionals by SC Media and BluVector looked at what technology companies are using today for intrusion detection and what their plans are for the future. So I'd like to take this opportunity now to welcome Travis. Travis, why don't you start off today's discussion with your insights about the survey?
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here today. So, wanted to set the stage, around still intruding after all these years. I think it's an important starting point to kind of talk about the cyber threat landscape and how it's been evolving over the years. So wanted to spend the next couple of minutes discussing, level setting some background, and kind of setting the stage for the topic in the survey as well. Hopefully to have a little bit more meaning from some of the results. So what we've learned over the last, 10 to 20 years around cyber threats, they're aggressive and very persistent. So if they're targeting specific informations or systems, they're very resourceful and dedicated to, trying to solve that problem. It's important to note and comment that cyber defense and being the defender is probably one of the hardest jobs there is. The cyber defender has to be right 100% of the time to stop a bad actor. Cyber adversary only has to get lucky once and find that one small weakness or gap, and it could be a configuration vulnerability in software, it could be a process gap. It doesn't only have to be a technical problem. Social engineering, for example. So they just have to be right once, where the defender has to be right 100% of the time to minimize or reduce that impact. So obviously that kind of, the deck is stacked against the cyber defender from that perspective. I equate it very much to the cat and mouse game, where historically the cyber defender has been very reactive to what the adversary is doing. I think the the aggressiveness and the persistence has been predominantly on the attacker side, constantly changing their techniques and tactics based on what security is being implemented within an environment. The one advantage the cyber adversary has had historically is the ability to have some good idea of what the cyber defenders are actually implementing within their environment, whether that be access to commercial security products, compliance requirements. A majority of organizations, what they deem as successful with respect to cybersecurity is only being compliant. And what we've learned over the years as well is the compliance requirements are pretty stale and provide a weakness for the from the defensive perspective. So it doesn't react quickly enough to actually slow down the adversary. The other thing we know about cyber threats in general, is as this whole area has become monetized, they're really looking for efficient ways to carry out their attacks. So whether it be lazy or just a high degree of efficiency, we want to leverage the easiest path of resistance into an environment. Whatever the easiest and convenient way into an organization, they're going to leverage that. So if the front door to the organization is open, they're going to walk right in. If the door is locked, they're just going to walk around and see if the back door is open. They're not going to use some, a zero-day exploit that they built unless they absolutely have to. So, obviously, there's doing good hygiene, and a lot of the security basics are very critical there. And from the speed piece, so they're going to, if an attack is successful, they're going to continue to use it on multiple victims over and over again until they either have to change their tactic or they pick a different target set. Okay, the next slide I wanted to discuss briefly is just kind of evolution of malware. So as the adversaries have kind of changed their tactics and have adapted, malware and the purpose of malware has also, in their toolkits, have also evolved as well. So obviously malware is software that is intentionally created to damage computers, devices, systems, gain access, to different computer systems and information systems. But peeling back the onion, what is it really used for? So historically, fame was really the first, fame and notoriety. Proving that something could be done and getting the credit within the community was the big driver initially. And then nation states and governments were really focused on, from an espionage perspective, using the cyber realm to their advantage. Next, historically, we saw a lot of intellectual property theft. How can we leverage the cyber domain to, steal intellectual property and help other businesses or state-sponsored businesses be more competitive in the global economy? And then from a terrorist or organization standpoint, we saw a rise in DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks against certain areas as a retribution for certain maybe geopolitical issues. And then what we've seen over the last several years are what I would call kind of the rise of destructiveware, whether that be ransomware, where they're driving a lot of financial gain, and then wiper software, to where the adversary is really intent on disrupting a business or mission operation. So whether it be power grid, industrial control systems, things that really impact day-to-day life. Okay, so looking at the adversaries and how they've evolved, and that their toolkits and their motives have evolved over time. I'd like to talk a little bit about the the proactive and reactive nature to the cyber defense domain. What I've seen in my throughout my career is organizations are very accustomed to leveraging a reactive mindset with respect to dealing with these evolving threats. Basically, compliance, and as compliance requirements change, they react and implement capabilities to mitigate threats based on what the compliance and mandates tell them. Obviously, we've seen over the last several years that's not a great model to follow. So organizations, and specifically some industry verticals, like financial sector, government in general, have spent a lot of time and effort really focusing on risk management and looking at the threats and where the important data is in their environment in a more of a proactive manner to reduce risk. But in general, what I've seen is the cost and impact to an organization or a company is an order of magnitude greater in a reactive manner. So if they wait for something bad and go back to try to fix it, they wait for that impactful event to go and to get justification of money from an upper level management or the board of directors to invest and build into their security program is definitely a losing battle. So over the last year with WannaCry and NotPetya, we saw significant financial impacts to companies that were operating in that kind of reactive manner, as well as many other breaches we've seen, having impacts of hundreds of millions of dollars within a quarterly loss for several companies. And even some companies, their valuation was impacted in the billions of dollars range. So really taking this proactive mindset to cyber defense is really going to be critical going forward to having any kind of positive impact to minimize and mitigate cyber threats and the risks they pose in an organization. I think it's a big cultural shift in general that I think everyone has to kind of push within their organization. And then, why are organizations, why aren't more taking a more proactive approach? I would say that, the main driver is it's really hard to measure return on investment within cybersecurity within the budget. Surely looking at a numerator and denominator, how many attacks were detected, and then how many were actually levied against the organization. That denominator is always the unknown, and based on that, it's really difficult to really fully show that. So I think looking at other ways to measure progress and success and ROI is definitely going to be key going forward in helping, the adversary is very persistent and adaptive, and the cyber defense community has to get there in a hurry as well. Okay, so so that said, kind of level setting in the background, I wanted to spend a couple minutes discussing a couple of high-level points within the survey I found interesting, and then I'll pass it over to Stephen to deep dive a little bit further. So the first point I found interesting was 24% of respondents felt that security was actually baked into the company's DNA. So basically, 3 in 4 organizations that were participated in the survey, the representatives didn't feel security was baked into the DNA. So one litmus test I like to use within or recommend to friends as far as interviewing for different jobs and looking at companies to partner with, asking the senior leadership within the company, who's responsible for security in your organization. In the event you're the one applying for that job, if they say, we're hiring you to be responsible for cybersecurity in the organization, that's probably a negative sign there, right? So everyone should has a part to play for cybersecurity within the organization, and that's part of the company's DNA. Another note is, society is really driven to this rapid innovation and getting features and functionalities to the market fast. And security within products, applications, et cetera, is rarely built in because it's the time to market and the speed to market. And security is really seen as this, this weight that just really slows down the sales cycle and slows down the process to get features and capabilities to the market quickly. However, the ramifications of not building that into the product and the whole culture of the company is, there's always this risk, and more and more you've seen, even with adversaries targeting the supply chain, the chances and likelihood of something negative coming back to bite an organization for not building in security is ever increasing. The next bullet or finding within the survey I found interesting is, 50% of the organizations mentioned about not having capabilities to detect unknown threats. So as we've seen the cat and mouse game, the adversaries are constantly finding ways to thwart and mitigate and bypass compliance requirements and the existing and legacy security stacks. They're finding ways to bypass, recompile their tools so they have different hashes to defeat signature-based technologies. They're leveraging resources that are embedded and built into standard loads of operating systems. They can be used for good or bad, and they leave less of a fingerprint. They don't necessarily have a lot of logging within the system. Things like PowerShell, for example, system resources, and they're leveraging those tool sets and toolkits that are embedded and native to the environments to be successful. The next bullet, business operations are more important than security. I think I discussed that pretty heavily earlier. And fileless and file-based malware detection are still a known gap and a pain point that many organizations are still trying to fight. Okay, with that said, I'll pass it back over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, sir. Excellent analysis of the key findings. I'll talk about some of the other topics since you did such a good job there. Let's talk a little bit about who actually was taking part in our survey. Let's look at the demographics of this. So we had 376 folks participating. Let's go over to the demographic slide, if you would, please. And they represented a lot of senior executives, security professionals, owners, directors, and under all VPs and directors, we have a variety of managing directors here, VPs of security, VPs of risk, but these are all quite senior people. So that the results that we saw in the survey represent a good cross-section of industry as well as senior level management. Let's go to the next slide, please. In terms of company size, we have, again, a good cross-section of small, medium, and large-size businesses here. The 5,000 or more employees, that's nearly a third of our survey there of the very large companies, with the medium-sized companies coming in at just under a quarter. If you look at the revenue breakdown again, we have a nice split of all types of revenue here. So the responses that the survey brought back to us shows that we're looking at a pretty consistent result across all sizes of companies. Let's go to the next slide, please. There were a number of topics that I found fascinating when it comes to the survey. When you look at at what keeps a CISO up at night. For the very large companies and the mid-sized companies, the top response was actually insider attacks, whether it be malicious or benign. For smaller companies, it was hackers. But both of those topics came out as being more important than not knowing where your data is and not knowing which data is at risk. And this is something that I actually find a little disturbing. We all know that there are going to be bad guys in your network. When I speak at security events, I will often ask at the outset, raise of hands, how many of you folks know your networks have been breached? And there a few hands go up, and then I'll say, how many of you don't know? By the way, the rest of you better raise your hands, because if you don't know about it, you've got somebody poking around in there already. If you have your data, if you know what data you have, where it is, and which data is at risk, the fact that there's somebody poking around inside your network becomes almost less important, because if you know where your data is, you can protect it. But it seems to me that these particular results show that a lot of senior level executives, and again, across all size companies, across all size in terms of revenue and staff, are still focusing more on the breaking news of the day. My gosh, are we going to be on the news because we got hacked? And again, as Travis clearly pointed out, they're also more concerned about operations as opposed to security. One would hope that after the compliance regulations that have been passed recently and the breaking news that CISOs would be more concerned about where their data is. Particularly, in less than 3 months, or about 3 months, we're going to have the European Union's GDPR regulation come into effect. That, even though you might be a U.S. company, you'll still be impacted by that if you handle any private information of European citizens. You need to know where your data is. You need to know if it's at risk. You need to be able to produce it on demand if a European citizen asks you to do so, starting May 25th. So the results here indicate that a lot of companies are still a bit behind the curve on getting ready for compliance and understanding just how important it is to know where your data is and know what's going to happen to it. The other thing that caught my attention was in surveys that SC Media has done through about the middle of last year, DDoS was always the number one concern. Are we going to be able to keep our companies up and running if we're under attack? And way down at the bottom was fileless attacks, fileless breaches. We found in this survey that those numbers have flipped. And I'm assuming at this point, we have to do more research as a publication, but I'm assuming this is mainly because of the CPU breaches and the CPU vulnerabilities that have been discussed at length over the past few months as fileless vulnerabilities. We also are looking at the possibility of nanotechnology attacks on computer systems. That would be a fileless attack. Those nano attacks, according to analysts that I've spoken to in the past, could very well bypass existing security technologies. So fileless is certainly coming to be top of mind. I think we'll be talking about this a lot more in the future, and I look forward to having that discussion as well. In the meantime, Travis, why don't we get to some questions about the survey that you and I can discuss, and go from there. You know, the research that SC Media conducted on intrusion detection systems shows that this rather graybeard technology is still, in fact, very important. Real-time IDS was invented back in the mid-'80s, and yet the survey shows that it's as relevant today as it's ever been. What is it about IDS that keeps this technology from being, fully subsumed by some of the other technologies of the day and just becoming part of a generic security appliance? What makes, IDS so important that it continues to be something of a disruptive market? Can you address that for our audience, please?
Yeah, sure, Stephen. Yeah, there's definitely different vantage points to that topic. So I'll share some of my thoughts. Back to the one of my earlier slides around the evolving threat landscape and this cat and mouse game. So adversaries react and change their tactics, techniques, and procedures based on what their targets and victims are implementing from a security perspective. The cybersecurity industry and organizations building, security operations to detect the actors adapt to what they see and how the cat, so to speak, evolves as well. So you have this kind of a ping pong match going back and forth. So, adaptation on both sides of the fence, and the security tool of the day or capability that worked yesterday may not work tomorrow, and the adversaries are switching to something else or targeting a weakness elsewhere. So historically, what we've seen, starting with signature-based technologies, host-based antivirus, signature-based intrusion detection systems. Then you see it going back to where the behavior-based, intrusion prevention systems. Then you see, host-based IDS, host-based intrusion prevention systems, firewalls, and different iterations of firewalls, et cetera. It's kind of this back and forth environment. So what we're seeing today is, 20 years of infrastructure being built, credentials being stolen, really having a foothold within organizations, relying solely on endpoint technology for, detection and defense, solely relying on network devices for detection, isn't going to work 100% of the time. You can hide or spoof different ways. So, having this defense in depth best of breed where the tools really talk to each other. So breaking down the silos is going to be critical. But having, if an endpoint's been compromised and the data is spoofed to it, it thinks it's okay, but it's not really. But you may fool the endpoint to saying this activity is actually happening, but you can't lie to the network when you see the traffic actually leave the environment. So, it's good checks and balances of having endpoint and network technologies working together. I think, it's kind of this pendulum going back and forth. So it's and it's really keeping pace with what the adversary is doing. But I think as they've tried to find different ways to hide and evade detection, adversaries or cyber defenders have to adapt and find cunning and creative ways to leverage technologies or look at next-gen technologies to kind of keep pace.
According to the research, companies of all sizes, broken up by employee count, revenue, face the same issues at almost the same percentage rates. The top gap in their intrusion detection plan is that they can't detect the unknown threats, followed by that what they have doesn't provide enough contextual awareness. It doesn't help them detect lateral movement, and it doesn't provide them with essential network visibility. Does it surprise you that these were issues that were consistent across the board? And what needs to be done to fix these shortcomings?
Great question and point there. Absolutely no surprise. I actually spent, in my former life within the government space, spent many years collecting metrics and looking at this problem specifically within a large government enterprise. What I've basically come to realize over the years is that almost every organization really has three major problems. The problems are detecting the unknown threats, which you just mentioned, being able to detect the advanced threats depending on how they adapt, whether that be better analytics, better capabilities, better correlation amongst tools that they currently have. That's one major problem. The other problem is they're drowning in events. So every organization has a massive amount of events. And the problem is, are they actually doing the alert prioritization effectively? With the cyber workforce challenges and gaps today, the limited resources and the highly valuable resources, are they actually looking at the events within the systems that cause and pose the most risk to the organization? So are the systems prioritizing what the urgent need or urgent event of the moment is, and making sure that addressing that problem will also help address with some of the unknown threats. So those are two major problems, and the last problem is really around the cyber workforce. So ensuring that tools are intuitive, easy to use, and automate a lot of the manual challenges is critical. So there's a huge cyber workforce challenge globally, 2 million plus open positions that are unfilled currently for cybersecurity professionals. The frequency and the high turnover rates within the organization. So one real key point to the risk management piece and drowning in the events, the cybersecurity professionals that have been in an organization for a period of time actually understand the business operations of the organization. They know where the information is. They know where critical information is. They know what's normal and what's abnormal. So their skill sets and intuition can help identify some of these unknown threats when something deviates from the norm. When you have high turnover rates and also partly caused due to the cybersecurity workforce shortage, you're going to have gaps in that. So which means you're going to have a lot of new folks into your environment. They may or may not be highly skilled, and it also takes a while for them to understand the organization and the business and the information and what's important and what's not. So there's this huge ramp-up curve as well. So the other issue is adversaries are very opportunistic, and many times they may even know when some of your security or key security personnel actually change jobs. And it definitely has occurred where they stage their attack during that transition period.
I would think that just using social media sites like LinkedIn or Facebook would be a very good tool for them to identify when senior security people are changing jobs.
Yep, the availability of tools to do such that, or to help better enable spearfishes, it definitely goes back to the original comment. The cyber defenders have one of the hardest jobs in the world. That definitely makes it harder.
Yeah, we asked our readers what they plan to do to improve security proactively. We gave them choices of user security, network security, data security, or application security. The top response for companies with 5,000 or more employees was improving user security, identifying identity and access management. That was up to 5,000 was identity and access management. For larger companies, the top reply was improving the network security with advanced perimeter defenses. What is it about the larger companies that makes them look to traditional perimeter defenses, assuming that they can actually define the perimeter, as opposed to focusing more on, knowing who's accessing the data and if they have the right to access the data? My personal expectation was that user security would be tops with application second. However, application security came in dead last in almost every category. That kind of surprised me.
Yeah, actually, a very interesting point. I would say that, obviously every organization has, different priorities or risks or gaps. But, just in general, my observation based on the respondents are the larger enterprises, knowing how many systems are in their network, where the networks are located, just what's actually coming and going from their environment. Just answering some of those basic questions is a huge challenge, especially when they're geographically separated, and they may or may not have security resources, in country or even in continent. So that's usually one of the easier ways to get to that point, getting to the level of identity management. So there's two factors there. The smaller companies, it's a little bit easier for them to control in some cases. Their resources and understanding what data they have and where it is and who accesses it. The other thing too is, for the larger companies, in some cases they're probably more frequently targeted, just because it's a bigger attack surface. And there's more revenue potential there as well, or bigger ability to have impacts. But there's two ways from a detection perspective. It's really looking at the real-time or, basically kind of a pre-breach or real-time detection when the adversary actually gets a foothold in the environment and conducts their attack, whether it be like an exploit, through spear phishing or some type of URL that's sent through email, through like a web-based attack, are two predominant ways to get in the environment. And then for the other organizations, that are already in, how do you identify that the adversary is in there? And many times they actually look like legitimate users. They have valid credentials, which makes the identity and access management a little more difficult when they're leveraging a valid user's access to get to certain data. So, really looking for lateral movement, the way the adversaries are, acting within that environment, and how they're, from a malicious command and control perspective, what data is leaving their environment and, where their systems are talking to. For the large enterprises, with a pretty large global footprint, I think it makes sense that they're trying to gain that broader picture, and then they have a much bigger attack surface. So just getting, trying to not drown in events and have some level of, visibility that gives them broad coverage across different attack vectors, I think makes sense. Getting into the other part of it too probably is around it's very resource intensive on the identity and access management, and the larger companies probably have a much more difficult time doing that, and or having the resources to do that as well, because there may be hundreds of thousands of users that they have to track and maintain, and that's a lot of overhead to actually do that effectively. So those would be a couple ideas or perspectives that I would have on that survey result.
Well, you're certainly right about the overhead and the challenge of trying to track, literally, millions of workers. On the other hand, if you don't know who's in your network and can't identify the real, Joe Smith against the fake Joe Smith, your data is going to be gone in a moment. What conclusions were you able to draw from these results? Was there anything that actually surprised you? Or was there anything that you learned from these results that you might not have expected?
So I've been in this business enough that nothing surprises me, but it hopefully makes me more pessimistic, I think, in times. I would say that, any organization to be successful and have a high maturity, from their cybersecurity model and program is really driven by, the culture and the maturity of their people, processes, and technologies, and how all three of those work together. So I would say probably the biggest the finding was that only 24% of respondents felt that within their organization, security was baked into its DNA. That's probably the most troublesome finding from the whole survey. And then I would say the second one is really that that almost 50% of the respondents said they lack the capabilities to detect unknown threats. Obviously, unknown threats are threats that there isn't a signature for already, and we're seeing adversaries, they're basically moving as fast as they can to tool sets that, recompile the file every time or find mechanisms that make it very difficult for signatures to detect. So, that's a trend we've seen over the last 5 to 6 years. So I would say probably those are the two most troublesome, and they kind of build off of each other. The companies, security is not baked into the DNA, and it's not being proactive about putting in places and capabilities to actually have impact against the adversaries. So those two metrics are probably the most troublesome, and they definitely, are related.
Well, we are running short on time, so let's try to get one more quick answer in here. I talked earlier on about fileless, and you mentioned that in your opening remarks as well. And in past surveys, I mentioned that SC Media has found that fileless was relatively low. What should we be looking at over the course of the next year or so in terms of fileless attacks, and what kinds of defenses do we need to put in place that maybe we're not putting in place now against fileless attacks?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question. I think we're seeing a quick movement to fileless-based attacks because they leave little evidence on the endpoints and within logs and things like that, make it much more difficult to detect. Malicious JavaScript, shell scripts, etc., whether it's embedded in files or being served via a website. We're seeing maybe 50% or more of attacks being leveraging fileless-based attacks, and even some of the concept code targeting Meltdown and Spectre, are basically initially a JavaScript-based attack. So a lot of the signature-based technologies, antivirus, etc., and some of the signature-based technologies aren't really looking. The volume of those types of files are so great, and the chance of having false positive hits and flooding the cyber defenders with more data. Just only looking at some of the signatures behaviors is very problematic, and why a lot of things don't detect those threats today. And those attack vectors, and that's exactly why the adversaries are moving that way. It's much harder to detect. Things aren't really looking at them from a malicious perspective at scale. So unless organizations are being proactive with their cyber defense and their cyber defense program, really implementing tools that cover those attack vectors, compliance requirements don't force organizations to do that. So I would say looking at technologies to really detect fileless-based attacks is definitely fileless-based attacks, and the most common attack vector there is through spear phishing. Are key and major areas. So I would definitely urge organizations to focus on those two areas. We've seen a lot of emphasis and interest in artificial intelligence and machine learning in the space as well. There's definitely a lot of marketing around those technologies, but I definitely see that as the future to help address some of the cyber workforce problems going forward. So I definitely think there's some merit in exploring that technology base as well. And the other thing I would also mention, Stephen, as an attack vector and something looking at an organization, with IT consolidation and a lot of budget cuts, there's been a rapid move to the cloud, and people have kind of lost track of where some of the data is, and they've consolidated a lot of the resources. There's definitely some efficiencies in that financially. However, if from a security perspective, if the organization isn't proactive with their security program and really focused on attack vectors, segmenting their network properly, it actually makes the life of the cyber adversary a lot easier because it's really putting all of the all the keys in all the eggs and keys in one basket, right? So it really makes their job a lot easier. So I would say that's a huge area that we didn't really cover in this survey, but as far as an after-action item, really looking at segmentation of the networks and isolating that critical data from risky assets.
Yeah, it does come back to the question of operations versus security, and we did see that operations still does tend to trump security in a vast majority of companies. But I just looked at the clock, and we actually have run out of time. I'm sorry we didn't get to any of the questions, but all of the questions will be turned over to Travis and his team. They will be able to get back to all of you after the fact. This does conclude today's Analysis Brief webcast, still intruding after all these years. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us and look forward to discussing this technology again in the future. Obviously, there's so much more to say about it, and I hope that we can have you back again in the future, Travis, to discuss this. But at this point, thank you all for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you may be. We hope to have you back again soon. Bye now.